Alex Page, who is the engineering director of applied AI at Big Panda.
Using an LLM doesn't really require knowledge of any of that. In general, it's just very accessible. We need to have a way to go from structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data, and a lot of it the same data that we're putting in a vector database, and translate that into meaningful nodes and edges or relationships in a graph database. And that's actually a really hard problem to solve.
What is going to be the role of the IT operations professionals that are currently your customers? Like, how will that change as agents move into action and are more autonomous?
It'd be less of like, okay, now I can fire 100 people, and more of a, oh, great, now like I've got some revenue generating projects I have more resources to allocate to, sort of thing.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Chief AI Officer Show. Today, I'm bringing you Alex Page, who is the engineering director of applied AI at Big Panda. Alex, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. Excited for the discussion.
Yeah, me too. Before we get started, can you give our listeners and watchers just a quick background on you and the work that Big Panda is doing?
Yeah, sure. So I've been at Big Panda for coming up on 5 years. It's been a wild ride. It's a great company. Very interesting space. I think great product. Obviously, I'm biased, but it's I've worked at several software companies. I've built software. I've been in sales engineering, so it was kind of technical sales of enterprise software. But Big Panda is definitely the first true startup I've worked at, and it's probably not for everyone, but it's definitely for me, kind of thing. I love the culture that's typical of startups, and it's not like a Series A. This is a bit more mature than that. So it's, but it's still very much like you have to wear a lot of hats. There's a ton of work to do, but you just feel like you are making such of a very tangible and direct impact, which I love. So yeah, it's been great. A little background on Big Panda. It's an IT or AI ops enterprise software company. So we build software that's directly geared towards the folks in IT operations, which are sort of the unsung heroes of not just IT organizations, but really any organization that's going to have an IT footprint, which is pretty much everyone. They're the folks that are responding to system alerts when your systems are having issues, going down. They're the ones that are getting woken up at 2 a.m, jumping on a bridge call, working through the issue, fixing everything, bringing it back online, sort of thing. And so our software is to aid those folks in keeping things online, and then when they do go down, getting them back up faster. And then, so I actually joined Big Panda as a sales engineer. So I was focused more on, giving technical demos, running POCs, POVs with interested buyers, sort of setting up Big Panda and their environment for them to evaluate, and then ultimately decide to move forward. And that was, awesome. I've been doing sales engineering for some years, and it's a great, I think it's an awesome role if you have somewhat of a sales or business itch, but also a strong technical side. So I really enjoyed that. But then at some point, I'm sure we'll get into this, made somewhat of a shift there. And so what I do now is very different. Like you said, now I'm running the team behind what we're calling product number 2, which is Biggy. And that's sort of our AI Ops Copilot assistant product that is an AI native system, but still targeted towards those IT operations folks. So kind of a long-winded intro, but yeah, that's me and that's Big Panda.
Yeah, that's helpful context. As a kind of like serial founder and serial startup marketing leader, I also know the joy of working for smaller companies where you can drive a lot of impact. There, it's not without its frustration sometimes, but it is a fun ride where wearing a lot of hats is the norm. I doubt Biggy is a nod to Notorious B.I.G., but the hip hop lover in me also loves that that's what it's called. And we'll get into that in more detail in the episode. But first, just on a personal level, you mentioned that background in sales engineering, and then this shift. Now you're engineering director of applied AI, and you're launching this like agentic Biggy solution at Big Panda. What sparked that transition? Like, why shift to being a builder and more of a product leader or engineering leader?
Yeah, so I started out my career, and even in high school, started building websites. Quickly became like super in love with programming and just computers and IT in general. I have been building my own personal computer since I was like 9, um, and so I always knew I was going to be somewhere in technology or IT. My first job was writing software for just like kind of mission critical revenue processing systems at FedEx, and that was a great learning experience. It's one thing to learn how to program in school, even college, versus the on the job training you can't beat. But then that was great. I just kind of had an opportunity to move into sales engineering, and I always sort of drifted or kind of leaned towards, like writing software, but then demoing it internally, and sort of like kind of the sales itch, right, was something that there is opportunity in even software development to lean in that direction a little bit. And then the opportunity came to kind of lean a little bit more in that direction with moving to a sales engineering role, which I didn't even know was a thing. And I immediately fell in love. It was sort of like, I don't know if I feel lucky that this happened, especially so young, but you are doing something and then you maybe do something else and you just sort of hits you like, oh, this is what I could do for the rest of my life. I sort of had that moment a few months into the sales engineering gig. I really, again, I love doing that. It's very demanding, but it's I don't know. It's a great gig for the right type of person, I think. And so I'm doing that, and then moved to Big Panda. I'm doing that there. Still loving it. But then ChatGPT came out, and I immediately started messing around with it, as did many. And a couple months into it, I started realizing like, hey, this seems like this could be applied to what we do at Big Panda. I could see utility in this. So started with some initial prototyping of certain things, and so what I'm focused on is all the things that I'm hearing through my years of being a sales engineer at Big Panda, in terms of what customers like about what Big Panda does versus maybe some other things that they struggle with that we weren't really focused on at the time. Still in the IT ops realm, but there's a huge array of activities involved in that, and so I started prototyping around some of the other areas there using LLMs initially. And this is, mind you, in the GPT 3.5 days, right? So I look back on some of those early prototypes, and it was definitely pushing the models at the time. And it's funny because now those same sorts of things would be just, almost too easy. Yeah. So started doing some prototyping, and then moved one of those prototypes into a design partnership. Got really good feedback. It was received really well by customers. And so then that moved to GA. And this is like all within like a 3 or 4 month span. And our CIO, Chief Innovation Officer, Jason Walker, kind of got wind of like, there's a sales engineer doing that. Let me talk to him. And long story short, I joined his team and made a full-time job out of prototyping. I was just super, and still am super fascinated in this technology. I think and I think a lot of people have realized this, is it's just extremely transformative. And unlike traditional ML, it's just so accessible, right? I'm not a necessarily like a machine learning expert, right? I mean, I've done, at this point, I've done experimentation, but using an LLM doesn't really require knowledge of any of that. I think there are certain principles that is helpful to know. But in general, it's just very accessible. So anyway, I joined Jason's team, start making a full-time job out of prototyping and kind of try 10 things, one might stick, and then let's move that down into, actually design partnership and eventually maybe productized into production. And through those efforts, sort of started landing on, well, I think maybe a holistic system makes sense here, an AI native Copilot assistant. And that really is where Biggy was born, we'll say. It was in a design partnership with a specific customer. I could keep going, but I'll stop there and we can drill in wherever you'd like.
Yeah, I love that story. One, you touched on to democratize, the accessibility of LLMs. I think that's what excites people so much about the potential. Certainly something that as a builder excites me, right? Like I'm not a technical person. I can be writing Python now. There's just I can be writing applications that I could never have built. And I feel like the core skills are really just curiosity and desire to build things. And if you're good at that and problem solving and you think from first principles, there's a lot you can do with a very healthy dose of understanding the limitations of the technology. And I think a lot of the startups that are doing well in the space, to your point, are the ones who were pushing the models to their limits from the very beginning. And with each release of a new model, are kind of step changing their products because they're already operating kind of on the frontiers of what they can do. It just gives you the ability to move so much faster. I'd love to dig into your journey just a little bit for the people on this show that want to do something like you did, right? That are in a bigger company, that have an idea, that are playing around with something. What was that process like? You mentioned your, the CIO kind of hearing about you, but did you have a meeting with him? Did you bring the prototype to him? Did you talk, what was the conversation like? How did you make the shift? And what was the decision that happened to be okay, let's actually do this. This is going to be a product for us.
So he approached me. It wasn't my intention for that to happen, right? What I was just, hey, this technology is super interesting. There is definitely opportunity to apply this to what we're doing and make our product better. That was my agenda, right? And that to me excites me. Again, it's these kind of opportunities I feel like may still happen in larger companies. They're more abundant in smaller companies. And as an opportunity to make an impact, make a difference, I saw an opportunity to do something that I think would be useful. It ended up working out. It ended up being useful. I didn't know that starting out, of course, but that was validated through design partnership. And to me, that was the success of that journey was, well, great, this was useful. And now we can make it available to our customers. And then right around that time is when Jason approached me and said, well, what about doing this full time? And it just wasn't something that it wasn't not some kind of master plan. But then, and it definitely, I paused right when that happened because again, I fell in love with sales engineering, right? I love working with different customers. I liked the sales, kind of the thrill of running a sales cycle, but then also being able to problem solve different use cases that, we need to kind of tune the product in a different way to meet, I like that kind of problem solving loop. But I kind of get to do all those things in this new role. I get to work with customers, and that's important to me as we're building out this Biggy. I need to stay constantly in front of, all right, well, here's what it's now helping me with, but here's what I wish it would do a little bit better. Or here's a brand new thing that would be crazy if it could do this. I need that every day, and I still get to do that. Problem solving, no shortage of that. So it was, I remember being very hesitant. I'm glad in hindsight that I made that jump. But the things I was hesitant about ended up not really being an issue. It was just being worried about not being able to do those things. I get to still do all those things.
Yeah, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, also one of the best ways I feel to grow in any role and also personally. Talk to me a little bit about what Biggy does, where it started and maybe where it is today, and some of the challenges in that evolution.
Sure. I could spend an hour on that, by the way. So feel free to.
Tiny question.
Yeah. I'll start with where it started. Again, I joined Jason's team. I'm doing these prototypes. It was kind of like a new thing every week. Again, it's like, this is brand new technology. Like, let's just go see how we can use it in all these different ways. And so at one point I had then put together a deck of like, here's all like, innovation at Big Panda, Mr. Customer, let's show you what we're thinking about. None of these are in product yet, but here's where our head's at. Customers are interested to see that. They want to be involved in, or at least aware of how you're thinking of innovating. And so we had this as one of our customers, like, the existing core Big Panda customer. And we're going through the deck and we get to one slide, which was, of all the things in the deck, the thing that was the least real. Like, it was more of just an idea. And it was around, that's right around when RAG was starting to gain steam. And so this slide just depicted, hey, if we ingest and vectorize, all of your unstructured data and semi-structured data, your historical incident tickets, SOPs, runbooks, wikis, all the kind of internal documentation about IT ops at company X, then I think we can use a RAG system through retrieval, find relevant context to help you resolve a current issue. So if you said, hey, I'm having, I don't know, API gateway errors on this application, I should be able to go find if that's ever happened before, if we have any documentation, if you have any documentation internally on how to resolve issues like that, and then use an LLM to obviously do the final synthesis. Yes, this has happened before, and here's how you've resolved it. So that was basically the slide. And it wasn't really much more than a slide. And the customer said, hold on. That I want. Can we do that? And Jason was actually on this call, and we're on Zoom. I kind of virtually look at him, and he goes, yeah, well, can you give us the data? And the customer goes, yeah, I can give it to you tomorrow. So then started a design partnership. My focus went solely on that from that day. And within a couple of weeks, we had a working prototype. Awesome customer. I can't name them, but they're a great customer. And the people I work with there are super smart and just amazing to work with. So we iterated very closely. And it was almost like we were coworkers, which was great to get sort of an initial prototype working. Then they said, okay, I think this is good enough to like share with the rest of my team. And then they started using it. And at the same time, then we're starting to get, well, don't just help me troubleshoot stuff. Like, can I ask a question and you give me like actual like analytics? Like, how many P1s did we have in the last 6 months that were reassigned more than 3 times? And hey, can you actually hit live systems instead of just RAG and sort of agentically get me information from ServiceNow or Dynatrace or AppD, different monitoring tools? And so like the use cases just started exploding. And this design partnership continued. And, they are a customer now of Biggy as well. But I'd say it's still a design partnership like a year and a half later, in that, we are very much like in sync, and they continue to have great ideas. We don't implement everything. We have to balance what's useful to this specific customer versus what's useful to, a good amount of other customers, right? And prioritization and all of that, as this has become a real product. But, we still have that nice kind of back and forth. And I think it's just a very healthy relationship. And we replicated that across additional customers, that many of which are also now Biggy customers. And so that sort of mode for building this product has worked well. I think it has to be done in a certain way to work well, but we've been very successful with it.
Yeah, ultimately one of the best ways to build product though, right? To be very close to customers, helping them solve it, and then understanding how you can abstract that to a larger customer base, or, how to make that balance between their specific needs versus what the market might need. And it's amazing to see the evolution that I think very many people went on, right? You mentioned RAG, like that was such a big focus I remember when that was happening, because we were offering solutions in the space at my last company. And it was knowledge management was just like what everybody wanted, right? With like they realized the potential of LLMs for knowledge management and like just what you could do with RAG. But then that shift towards, okay, how do we use this and like unleash it on live systems for monitoring, for detection, for, potentially action, different levels of autonomy when it comes to agents. Talk to me a little bit more about that. Like, where are you now in terms of the level of autonomy? What are they doing within IT ops? And maybe how are you orchestrating what's going on across all those systems, which are inherently very complex and probably pretty sensitive for your customers?
Sure. I think one way I could explain that is I keep calling it core Big Panda. And what I mean by that is, Big Panda has been around for more than 10 years. And for most of that time, we've had one product or platform, which we just call Big Panda. And that is really an event management platform. And so the whole point of that is the companies we work with, the larger companies, right, of the country or the world, they don't have one monitoring tool. They have 10. I've worked with companies that have close to 50, believe it or not, because they're huge and there's, mergers and acquisitions over time, and different monitoring tools are better at monitoring different parts of the stack, et cetera, et cetera. So the problem that you face with that is, well, I've got alerts coming out of, 10, 20, 30 different tools. I can't make sense of, well, are these 5 alerts over here and these 2 over here related to the same problem? Like, I'm just staring at not just one screen with a bunch of stuff, 10, 20 screens, right? So core event management, Big Panda, is focused on consuming all of that data, distilling it, enriching it, correlating it. So then you now have one screen, but on top of that, at the very, to put it very simply, you're looking in terms of correlated incidents that contain N alerts, which is much better than 5 over here, 2 over there, 10 over here, and I somehow magically understood that they were all related, right? So it's the hub in like kind of a hub and spoke diagram, if you will. Now, that requires us to be able to integrate with all these different monitoring tools that are out there, right? So there's a huge focus on that, on the integrations with the core event management of Big Panda. Same principle with Biggy. Biggy is less on the like initial detection side. It's more on the, hey, like we're now escalating to L2, L3. We've got like an actual issue here. This is not just noise. We need to run a major incident, get on a bridge call. We need to like, design or figure out how to remediate this thing. We need to communicate, status, and we need postmortems when it's done, and all these other activities. That's where Biggy's really kind of living. But it's the same problem in terms of, well, everyone uses something different, right? Or there's just a lot of things to account for. So we need to connect to ITSM. Most people use ServiceNow, but plenty use Jira, Fresh Service, Sharewell, Remedy, right? So that's just ITSM. I just, rattled off 5 tools that I don't just need a simple API integration with. I need to be able to interact with it agentically, right? However many monitoring tools are out there, we want Biggy to be able to investigate via dedicated agents that we have for those different monitoring tools. The list goes on. So it's we don't just build integrations with Biggy. We mostly build we'll call them agentic integrations, or a tool specific agent, leveraging MCP. But oftentimes that's that's sort of a newer thing. So not a lot of these tools have like at least a GA MCP interface. So we'll just have an agent that's able to traverse APIs. But so building those is a lot of our focus, because we want Biggy to be able to plug into whatever you have, and whatever you have changes between our different customers.
Yeah, so that background put you in a great position for offering an agentic solution, which I'm assuming is part of where the idea came from, right? Because I think context is everything when it comes to getting value from agents. Prompts too, but context just as important. And so having that visibility over all these systems is a huge win for anyone trying to build a solution like this. Talk to me a little bit about how people feel moving beyond just the monitoring and the surfacing of incidents, whatever it might be. You mentioned like these agents are across all these different systems. They're helping surface connections between what's going on. Like they're bringing that insight to, I'm assuming, a human in the loop at some point that then makes a decision. What is the level of comfort right now that you see with customers in terms of how far you push that autonomy? Do they take action? Is it very much just like surfacing that insight? How does that all work within your product, or just generally, how do you feel about that in the market?
Yeah, I think my short answer to that is the key right now with where we're at and like the reliability of the current foundation models out there, like human in the loop is all I can say, right? Like
Yeah.
if in terms of action, uh, I would say with maybe some exception, at least when we're talking like enterprise, right? There should be we should be very cautious about an LLM deciding autonomously what action to take and then just kind of blindly doing that, right? So at the very least, we need gates and we need scoped permissions so that if we do wanted to do anything autonomously in terms of action, it is limited to the things that we've said, okay, this is okay. And really the way I would look at that is, and if it makes the wrong decision, it's not going to create like I'm on the cover of Wall Street Journal types of consequences, right? Like a lot of the things that we started doing, even with these agentic integrations, was more read operations, right? Go check New Relic for information about this alert and get the dynamic topology to walk dependency maps and see if there's any downstream issues that could be causing this. Like, and that might be 10, 20, 30 API calls, but they're all read operations. So there's you still want to have scoped access and everything in when that's the case. But I'd say we're now at the stage where we're moving towards Biggy actually doing things like, yeah, go check Ansible for my automations that I've defined and understanding this current issue that you, by the way, told me about. Thanks, Biggy. Now go tell me if there's a sequence of automation you think we should run. And it would go do that and then present the plan to you. I think we should run this, and then we'll run this with these input parameters. And then you say, yes, go do it, which is at that point really no different than you going into Ansible and hitting run, run, run. Then I think that's a good kind of human in the loop version of that. Everyone wants to get to the point where, yeah, Biggy, just detect the issue, determine if you should run some, set of playbooks or automation autonomously, and then go do it if you're confident and don't screw things up, right? We want to get there. And I really like the point you made earlier of like, depending on wherever we are and like models being released, you've got different use cases, and then GPT-5 comes out, and now these use cases that weren't possible before now are possible. I totally agree that, especially if you're in kind of startup mode, you should be building the kind of grandiose use cases ahead of time. And then they fall apart when you try and use them with the current state of models. And you just put that on the shelf. And then the next model release comes out. See if that's now feasible, right? And so that's sort of the approach that we've taken with starting to move into specifically automation in terms of like Biggy actually doing things. We had initial prototypes a year ago, but we didn't feel comfortable that foundation models, even with like well-built agents, were at the level they needed to be, even to like make a human in the loop version of that enticing. I think we're now much closer, and that is now brought back into the focus. We'll say it again and again and again, like absolutely with human in the loop. I think it also depends, like, this is some of this is maybe specific to us. If our agents run the wrong automation at like a, top 5 bank, and they bring down some, high throughput transaction processing system, that's really bad. If you're building an agent that is, I don't know, analyzing and marking inbound reviews as positive or negative sentiment, there's less consequences with something like that, right? Like, so it really does depend. But for us, it agents making mistakes can be catastrophic.
Well, that hurts as a B2B marketer, Alex, but no, I definitely get it. Yeah, the stakes are very, very different, and the thresholds for failure very different. And therefore, I think the governance that, the checks you need to put in place so different. Makes complete sense to me that you would focus on human in the loop for now. I think that's where most people are, to your point right now, especially in those use cases where you're dealing with high stakes data or situations and systems that you just can't bring down. And your point about the models getting better, operating at the frontier. I think the other thing there is not just a capability question, but like the cost question too, right? It can be that 6 months from now, something that was just really not feasible from a unit economic standpoint becomes very feasible when like the cost of tokens plummets by 10x or whatever it might be. Like new use cases open up that I think were impossible before. It's like there's so much going on in the space. What do you think are some of the themes and the challenges that customers are having as you deploy these systems, right? Like I know from even just my playing around, as soon as you move out of the pilot, right, and into production, there's all of these edge cases that happen, like running in a small environment, small data set. It's much easier to be accurate. How do you manage that shift from like pilot to production? And what are some of the things you're looking out for very carefully as you do that?
A few things come to mind. One is learning. So it's great if you build even a complex multi-hierarchy agent system that can do powerful things. But we're talking about like, in our use case, right, permutations of like, that are very hard to account for from like, if you think like from a testing perspective. So I may have a user at company X asking Biggy to go do X, Y, Z, and that involves traversing the APIs of ServiceNow to get some information and then getting some topology information from somewhere else, maybe Dynatrace, then cross-referencing back with ServiceNow to see its internal CMDB representation. Does that match up? Does that give me any net new information? Then maybe go reference a call transcript that we've indexed for some additional content, like all kinds of things that can and should happen to answer a given user's query. It's hard to test that. And so like we've been going pretty deep into evals. We're working with LangChain, great company. And they have a product Langsmith that makes it kind of easy to track this sort of stuff. But I think that, what your evals should look like does depend on your use case. For us, it's not so much, hey, when I ask this question, I get this near exact response. Well, the near exact response is kind of changing depending on when it was asked and what are the current conditions in the environment, right? I might say, do I have any active alerts in Dynatrace? And today the answer is yes, but in an hour it might be no, right? And both are potentially correct if that was the true answer, right? So we have to get a little bit more creative with how we are defining the evals that we're using to sort of validate things on an ongoing basis. But I think it's critical that you invest in that. It requires some thought and design. We've at this point have a framework to make it easy for us to design evals for all the different things we're doing. But I would say that probably one universal truth with that is, among other things, one useful thing to eval is, given a request, did the agent perform the right steps in the right sequence? And sort of, maybe some checks on like, was the final response like cohesive and incorporated the things that it retrieved along the way, and it was presented well and, wasn't offensive, and sure, okay, fine. But more importantly, did the agent do the right sequence? It doesn't matter so much what the actual result was. There were alerts today, but there's not alerts tomorrow, sort of thing. It's, did it call this tool in my Dynatrace agent? And then did it figure out that it needed to get this other piece of information here? And then, see what I mean? So it's kind of like you're evaluating the path of the agent versus the kind of the final output of it.
I think that's a really important distinction to make in use cases like you're saying, right? Like almost evaluate the chain of thought or whatever, however you want to term that, the behaviors that it's taking rather than the output. And it's like, as long as the behaviors are what you think, then that's great. Obviously, that's can be problematic with probabilistic systems, but it's still, that is the right way to go about it, I think. In terms of the capabilities, right? Like we that's just another great example of things that 3 or 4 years ago, like, no one would have been thinking about that kind of stuff, right? Like, how do we analyze the behaviors of, like, these agents processing all of these different, steps, to complete some sort of action, even if those actions are read-only? What are the capabilities, like, what breakthroughs where are you at in terms of the limits right now? And, like, where do you think the breakthrough what are some of the most interesting breakthroughs that could happen for, like, how you're delivering value in your field in particular?
Yeah. So I mentioned learning before. I think, you know, just making an API call to OpenAI or Anthropic and, it's sort of one shot, question answer, right? Relying more or less on its pre-trained knowledge. That was like, 3 years ago that was cool, right? Now that's like, come on. Then RAG came around and it's like, okay, vector database, I chunk, embed, throw it in there, then I retrieve against it, I get relevant context. Which, by the way, just in that retrieval layer, we spent a ton of time getting that perfect or near perfect. RAG fusion, hypothetical document embeddings, re-representation on the actual indexing.
I mean, you must have built, like, a knowledge graph to some extent too, right?
So we initially did not, and
Okay.
yeah, but that is exactly where we realized that's the next thing, right? So
Yeah.
we still have a vector database and we leverage it extensively, but a big part of the architecture that's newer is a true, graph database, a knowledge graph, right? What vector databases are good at is throw in all the stuff and I'll find what's relevant to anything that you throw at me for this question, this query. What are the most relevant things, right? And you can also, hybrid search, you can do like keyword BM25 type lexical search on top of that, but that's fine and well. But well, okay, what if the user's asking about issues with server 123, right? I might go find past incidents where server 123 was mentioned, and that's probably helpful. But what I can't really do so easily, at least in a vector database, is go find server 123, find what it's connected to, find common root causes of the things it's connected to that have then caused issues with server 123, right? That is obviously, we're talking nodes and edges, i.e. knowledge graph. And so that's where we've been investing a lot in the last, I'd say, 6 months. That sounds great, but the hard part of with a knowledge graph is you have to populate it. You have to put data into it, and it's not as simple as just embed this text, throw it in, right? We need to have a way to go from structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data, and a lot of it the same data that we're putting in a vector database, and translate that into meaningful nodes and edges or relationships in a graph database. And that's actually a really hard problem to solve in
Yeah.
in a production enterprise type environment where you're talking, I mean, I've seen CMDBs that have tens of millions of records. Like,
Yeah.
it's wild. But that's structured data. That's easy at the end, like, as far as I can deterministically populate based on that. One thing that we're on the tail end actually, but we've spent a lot of time and rightfully so, is on an agentic system where its entire job is managing, so inserting and retrieving from a knowledge graph. And so what we can do is we can throw anything at that, a Slack channel where we discuss an incident in detail, a 200-page PDF with images that describes how to, I don't know, install a new router at one of our hotel locations or whatever it is. And it can then translate that into, here are the nodes and the edges, I think, that would represent this. It's almost like building a subgraph. And then now, but don't just insert that, go look what I already have and see if now we need to actually, is this already information I know about? Are there sort of additions to that information? How should that be reflected in the graph?
Right.
So that actually is in and of itself a multi-agent system with, I don't know, I think maybe 15 to 20 different steps. Some of those steps are, agents, in some cases, teams of agents. It's like very complex, but to your earlier point, with the current state of models, was sort of what we needed to do in order to produce reliable, reliable representation in the graph. Because the problem with the graph is, if you mess it up, it's kind of hard to first detect that and then B, revert that meaningfully. So we have to be really careful with how data is inserted. On the retrieval side, it was kind of sort of like a sigh of relief. We spent months and months on just the insertion side of that whole agent system. And once we had that down, the retrieval was, a cakewalk, which is just reflective of the fact that we built the graph in a controlled, not Wild West way. So then there were things that the retrieval agent could depend on, as far as these types of nodes always will only have these types of relationships. And so it definitely made that side of it easier. But I'd say, to get back to your question, sorry for the long-winded answer. Knowledge graph is key to build a system that can not just better interpret and internalize context and knowledge, but also as the basis for learning. So what I mean by that is, we have plenty of times where users ask Biggy a question, they get an answer, and maybe we relied on some piece of context, and that context might be out of date. The user will then realize that, and they're incentivized to come back and say, "Hey, Biggy, thanks for that. And I know you got this from this Confluence page, but that's actually wrong. John's not on that team anymore. He's on this other team." And so now that will then result in this agent kicking off, and it's now seeing, okay, I see in the graph where that context kind of lives or is represented, and I need to rewrite those connections or change it, right? And so now you're sort of crowdsourcing, addressing the inevitable problem of context not being perfect, data not being perfect. You're crowdsourcing that to users to a degree. Knowledge graph is also great for that. So we're using a knowledge graph truly like a full-blown like ontology almost of people, process, history. I could talk about this for hours. As you can tell, it's super exciting to me.
I mean, I could actually talk about this for hours too. Like, again, my previous company worked in like automated ontology induction and like knowledge graphs and neurosymbolic AI. So this is all stuff that I find really, really fascinating. And that is a really fascinating solution to thinking about how you not just build the knowledge graph in the first place, but maintain it, right? And I was talking to someone on the show a few episodes back about problem with building knowledge graphs is often like organizations don't even know. It's a process of like self-knowing, and a lot of organizations don't even know themselves well enough. And like what you're building is very much like you're grounding it in the context of all this documentation, but also building these very interesting agentic flows to allow people to maintain that. I imagine that's already insanely complex. Like the other complexity is each customer probably has their own individual knowledge graph, and you might have some like abstracted meta knowledge graph about IT operations that could sit on top of that. Like, again, there's so many layers to that onion, but I do think that ultimately that is where true like differentiated value will be in this space, is like in the ability to build graphs like that and to help customers navigate their organizations in a way that I think, even if LLMs get infinitely like more powerful, like that's just, you will still need the knowledge graph or something like that in order for like one organization to provide context consistently to a model and like help it learn about who they are and what they're trying to achieve. So I mean, again, I could talk about this for hours. I know we're almost running up on time, so I want to jump maybe just to one last question and skip the the lightning round. But for you, as these capabilities progress, like what is going to be the role of the IT operations professionals that are currently your customers? Like, how will that change as agents move into action and are more autonomous?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if anyone really knows the true answer to that question or questions like that, right? Like, what's it going to be like in 5 years? Is this job still going to exist, sort of thing? It's hard to say. It's hard to say, okay, well, this job will definitely be automated out, so to speak. Well, but it's hard to say when that will be, right? I do see. So first of all, IT ops is in my mind, an ideal domain to apply this technology to. It's very like data heavy, cryptic in nature. If you ever looked at like an alert like a system alert. It's just like some of the alerts I've seen, like SNMP alert. It's just like an error on a printer is just like, it looks like I'm looking at cryptography or something. So like it's a great way, or there's great opportunity for LLMs to do what they do as far as making sense of things. If I had to dumb it down, I think there are plenty of things to do. At least the companies we work with, there's no shortage of work. So I think we'll see a lot of repurposing, right? These people in IT ops are like extremely sharp, smart, and they also have like almost like a firefighter mentality of like, because they get woken up in the middle of the night and they go have to, fix this thing and do it now. They're like very almost like hyper focused. Like these are great people, and so there's no shortage of work. Then they'll maybe be doing other things, more focused on, instead of putting out fires actively, because we can leverage agents to offload some of that. They're more focused on hardening systems as a whole, or designing networks in a more performant manner, or whatever. So I think it'll be more of a shift. It'd be less of like, okay, now I can fire 100 people, and more of a, oh great, now like I've got some revenue generating projects that I have more resources to allocate to, sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's what we'll see play out in a number of industries. That I really believe that the best way to think about this is not displacement, but it's not like who can we fire, but what work could we never afford to do that we can now do, and let's think about like the potential there. Alex, like I said, I could go on for another few hours with you about this, but that's all we have time for today. If people want to follow you and your work, where should they go?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Alexander Page probably should come right up, and bigpanda.io is our website. We've got information about our event management platform as well as Biggy on there. I love talking to people, so feel free to reach out to me personally. But yeah, this was a lot of fun, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming. To our listeners, that was Alex Page, Engineering Director of Applied AI at Big Panda. Go check out Big Panda. Go check out Alex on LinkedIn. Send him a DM if you listen to the show. Alex, thanks so much for coming on.